G'day humans, welcome to the safe space for dangerous ideas. I hope you're feeling okay. I hope you've got your head on straight. I hope you're not just like a cat in front of a laser pointer, constantly following the jingling, jangling keys that the media are trying to throw at you this election cycle. Today we have a balm for you. We have an opportunity for you. We have a vision of what the future could look like, what conversations could look like, what civilization could look like if we were all a little less hunkered down in our rival camps. I know this is not exactly the moment at which everyone wants to hear some big kumbaya message of comity when all you're trying to do is stop the other side from gaining power and ruining the world. But there's an insight to be had that Stephanie Lepp, today's guest, brings to us, which is worthwhile. And the insight is this. The alternative to the phony choice between any two strident positions is not just some squishy compromise, some midpoint between two extremes. There can actually be a genuinely new way of looking at every controversial issue, informed by the best of all sides. And if instead of hunting for the worst in our opponent's positions, we decided to harness the best, we would actually be able to create something new that maybe a quorum of people from the center could use to construct something more beautiful politically. That may sound extremely airy-fairy, and it is when I put it like that, but Stephanie puts it into practice on, of all places, X, Twitter, perhaps the least conducive place to nuance. And this is a fabulous conversation about her project, which is called Faces of X. She's a producer. It's a short series of short videos. And she'll tell us about it, so I won't preview it. But we basically wrestle with partisanship and ideological capture and both sidesism and how we might think more broadly and sort of free our perspectives this election cycle. Remember, one election is only one election. Go outside, touch the grass, hug your families. Remember that at the end of the day, most of what you're seeing on your social media feeds and on cable news is all a circus. There are bigger things at stake, and one of those bigger things is our ability to get along as human beings, as part of a collective civilization. We're all in this together, and no one knows that more than the one, the only, Stephanie Lepp. Well, lovely to meet you. Lovely to talk to you. This is great, Faces of X, and I hope that it works, and I suspect that it won't, and that we're all doomed. But, good on you for trying.
Thanks.
Should we talk about... so you can tell me, take this wherever you want, but I'm interested in what made you start this, but I'm also more interested in this whole question of kind of both sidesism.
Yeah.
Our desire to, the moment people hear about a mission that involves trying to get both sides to understand each other, a familiar retort is, well, then you just end up with some sloppy, mushy soup of both sidesism where you're sitting in the middle of whatever two extremes happen to be, on the playing field at any given time.
Right. Well, yeah, I'm actually not really coming from the perspective of trying to get people to listen to each other so much. I know a lot of the bridging field does come from this kind of orientation around civility and, mutual respect. And I think that's very important, of course. And I'm actually coming from the perspective of do you or do you not want to deeply understand the issue you care so much about? And if you do, it behooves you to take the insights no matter where they come from.
What if the other side has no insights?
And sometimes there is a side, let's say, or a perspective that is not worth including, for sure. But that can't be true about
if you're the right.
That can't be true about half the country, And the way that I kind of simplify it is it's highly unlikely that one side is entirely right. Right? That's just tribalism. It's also unlikely that both sides are equally right. Right? That would be both sidesism. It's most likely that most of us are partially right and some of us are more right than others, which doesn't make for a great tagline. But that's kind of what's up.
The tagline might be uncomfortable conversations.
Exactly, sure.
Let's just I do want to get to the two sides or multiple sides,
Yeah.
and how you synthesize them. But let's just pause for a moment on telling the difference between issues that are worth doing this exercise for or not. Because when you say it's not possible that half the country can be wrong, of course it is in some cases possible that half the country is just wrong, right? I mean, half the country, like half of Germany liked the Nazis in the 1930s. Half of Americans are wrong about the science of climate change. Half of Americans are wrong about the 2020
whether the election was stolen. Totally.
So what do you do in those situations?
I love it. You went like straight to the deepest question. I mean, it's like anything, synthesis can be weaponized, right? If I want to convince you of something that is center left, then I make the center the thesis, the left the antithesis, and then presto, the synthesis is this center left thing that I'm trying to convince you of. So yeah, we have to keep our wits about, like, how do we prevent ourselves from weaponizing synthesis in order to convince ourselves of something that we want to believe? I mean, we
have just gone deep, and I wonder whether we should take a 3-minute detour you to explain. Just give us Hegel 101 here, right? I remember my first year philosophy, but not everyone knows about theses, antitheses, and syntheses.
Yeah.
So what's that all about?
Well, should I explain what phases of X is, or just start with Hegel?
No, just start big, and
Hegel,
we'll go
Hegel 101. It's very simple. It's just the idea of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. So thesis is some idea. Antithesis is some opposing idea. And then the synthesis integrates the insights from both of the ideas and articulates a more comprehensive or a bigger picture idea. And any good synthesis becomes a new thesis, right? In our evolving, it's not like we end there. A good synthesis becomes a new thesis in our evolving understanding of reality.
Yes, and
ideally,
right. Well, and maybe just descriptively, even if it weren't ideally, right? I mean, the reason I invoke Hegel, and I'm not sure if you have, I haven't seen you actually mention his name.
I don't mention his name, but he's in there.
But the reason I invoke him is because this was his descriptor of basically just how history unfolds. Like it or not, that the way that human kind of thought evolves is someone comes up with an idea, another person pushes back on the idea, a third person kind of finds the best bits of both, and then whatever that new conclusion is becomes the new idea, which gets pushed back on, which gets synthesized.
And we call it evolution for a reason, right? And how do we know we're evolving and not devolving? Well, did it include more perspectives? Did you have a more comprehensive understanding of the thing?
Oh, that's interesting. Yes, right. Okay, so you could think of a positive evolution of human thought as being defined as an expansion of kind of the number of perspectives, an incorporation of a greater number of perspectives.
Which is
so
why
that an insular.
Sorry, go ahead. No, you go ahead. Sorry.
Well, just let me ramble for a moment and just try to tease this out. An insular indigenous tribe in the hills of Papua New Guinea has a worldview and a set of beliefs that might function for them for tens of thousands of years. But are we saying that, I guess we can be sort of Western chauvinistic enough to say that worldview is less comprehensive than a worldview that incorporates the points of view of the tribe and also rocket science and also evolution by natural selection and also, cosmology?
I mean, I would say so, but that is very much where I'm coming from. And so, which is why I also speak in terms not of like changing our minds, but of expanding our minds.
Yes.
Right? Like, can we integrate more? And ultimately what we're trying to grasp is infinite, right? There's a beautiful, I'm paraphrasing Albert Einstein, but he has this beautiful quote where he talks about how it is an optical delusion of consciousness to believe there are separate things. There is one whole we call universe, and our task is to develop our capacity to perceive it.
You
So-
didn't paraphrase. I was just reading along from your Twitter.
Well, that is actually paraphrased because
is that paraphrasing?
he didn't actually. It's a longer quote.
Oh,
but,
okay.
But it is, you know. So
well, you got the inaccurate quote verbatim.
I got the I love it.
So congratulations.
Thank you.
That.
Thank you. But that is what we're. That's So
talk about before we get to Faces of X, talk about the climate that we are. Don't talk about. I hate it when interviewers do that. Tell me a story about this. So there's a climate that has been emerging since the development of social media. And perhaps also partly contributed to by demographic change as people sort of self-sort into different parts of the country and different communities and whatever else you want to throw in there, where I think a lot of people have a visceral sense that it's getting more difficult to talk about issues and find common ground than it was when Walter Cronkite just sat in front of us for half an hour every evening and told us what to believe. What is that doing to our ability to have an idea, have an opposing idea, have a synthesis, and move forward? Because some would say that that wasn't necessarily in a healthy situation when we all got our news from three major networks either.
Yeah, no, it's gone from the gatekeepers to now like the Tower of Babel. I do have faith, but yes, I've heard you describe social media as where nuance goes to die. It doesn't have to be that way, and it's not.
Yes, it does, but we'll get to that.
Well, the algorithms are largely stacked against us, and you may not know this about I was the executive producer at the Center for Humane Technology. You might be familiar with that organization from Social Dilemma. So yes, I'm with you on the social dilemma, and the algorithms are stacked against us because the dominant social media business model is designed to maximize engagement.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you're saying that social media doesn't have to be the place where nuance goes to die, if only the algorithms were completely different and prioritized a totally different set of metrics than social media's business model is predicated on, then I can agree. And that just wouldn't be social media in any meaningful the way that we currently use the word. But we can call it elephant feet. If you want, like we can choose whatever mouth sounds we want to talk about this new technology where we communicate without it being necessary for the company's bottom line.
Right. And now you're going upstream, and you're going to have to go be upstream from social media, upstream to the fiduciary duty. Now we're getting into Faces of Capitalism territory, but you can even go upstream of that. But just to, I think I will say, I think the success of long-form, thoughtful podcasts like yours is a hopeful testament to the fact that people actually, there is a demand. There is a demand for content that helps people expand their hearts and minds. And yes, in order for that content to be properly amplified, we are going to need to change the business model and the political and economic context in which technology is, funded, developed, and used.
How would you do that? Let's just pause on that. This is a long preamble before getting to Faces of X, but it's all interesting to me. Can we just pause for a moment on reforming the business model of social media so that it doesn't divide us?
Sure. I mean, we've already talked about Hegel, so we're getting nerdy. So I'm just going to get nerdy again. There's a beautiful
framework. We're going to go through Proust. We're going to go through Descartes.
So there is her name was Donella Meadows. She was a brilliant systems theorist, and she came up with a framework. The 12 leverage points for intervening in a system, 12 leverage points for changing a system. And the leverage points that are lower down, it's like they're easier to push on, but they make less change. It's like putting on a Band-Aid. It's like, okay, we stopped the bleeding, but it's not really like dealing with the root cause of this thing. And then all the way up on the higher end is something like changing the goal of the system, which is really hard to change. But if you change that goal, you change everything. So when you ask, like, how are we going to change? It's like we need to push leverage points all the way up and down the scale. There's not. So yeah, you can like build a new tool that has like different metrics built into it, and that's really cool. But as long as you're operating within the context of the fiduciary duty to maximize short-term shareholder value, you're still going to run into. So, this is.
Oh, that's a bit pessimistic for me, Stephanie. You're basically saying that we need to overhaul, overhaul the economic system that we live in. Isn't there a simpler? I mean, so the.
If you want to stay just focused on social media, I'm happy to answer.
Yes, exactly. How do we change the way that Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg can make a fortune without deranging us?
Okay. Well, that maybe I'll just stay a little lower in the leverage points and just speak directly to social and metrics. I mean, you brought it up. I think it would be we could ask ourselves, like, what would be the metrics that would show us that Twitter was, like a healthy marketplace of ideas? Like, what if it was like, instead of likes, it was likes by people who usually don't like the same thing? What if it was like the emotional tone of your tweet? What if it was like, like new follows and unfollows between people who otherwise do not have any, interconnections in their social graph? Like, you could totally come up with a series of metrics that would really show you.
Keep going. Keep doing it. We're coming up with it right now. We're going to make $1 billion, Steph.
I mean, the whole business model thing is like it needs to be based obviously on something other than engagement, which means that it needs to be based on something other than the ad model, which some platforms are not based on or trying to like wean themselves off of.
So wait, you just dropped quite a lot into that. So you flew straight past it needs to be based on something other than engagement. A lot of people who aren't social media wonks won't necessarily understand how important that button is, right? The way that social media companies get paid is by maximizing the time that we spend on the website,
right,
and by maximizing our engagement, which means how much we share or like or comment on posts.
And right? What keeps us most engaged are the worst angels of our nature.
That's right. So nuance and anger, sophistication and like understanding and compassion, we look at briefly, go, and scroll past. But if there's something that completely owns and demolishes a side that we hate or reinforces preconceptions that we already have, we pump our fist in the air. We like it, we comment, we get into an argument about it, we forward it on, and all of that stuff. The algorithm goes, oh, this is good content. This is stuff that gets people connected. Mark Zuckerberg's original vision for Facebook, we're a connection machine. We build human connection. And it's obvious that it builds a kind of human connection, but the idea that any and all connection between any and all human beings is, by definition, good is belied by the fact that you could have a couple of terrorists talking to each other on a walkie-talkie, and that wouldn't be good connection, but it would be human connection.
Well, and it's hard to trust his, like, what he's saying about connection when you know the metrics that he's pursuing. Like, he's not, the metrics he's checking himself, checking himself on isn't like how many amazing French, it's like, did we or did we not hit our quarterly targets? So it's really hard to
trust. Where was your brain going with how many amazing French? Well, I want to know what that was. What's that metric? I want some of that metric.
Which is a great...
How many amazing French maids are dancing in the nude? How many amazing French croissants can I eat in a day?
I was going to say friendships, but I love that you thought it was...
Friendships.
That's amazing. No, definitely. That is probably the most important metric.
How much French cheese can I buy cheaply at Costco?
Yeah, that's really what our civilization is going for.
Look, small wins, Stephanie.
Yeah.
Baby steps.
Start with French cheese.
French cheese. Start with naked French maids eating croissant and cheese.
That sounds like a civilization I want to live in.
Exactly. Okay, so yes, so you would change the metrics and you would understand that, when Russia's henchmen are intervening in an American election, that is a form of connection, but it's not the form of connection that you would necessarily want.
Yeah.
Just to pick a random example. So you might get rid of engagement as the metric. You said you might reward things like new connections between people who otherwise don't see eye to eye on other things. Is there anything else in your grab bag that you can think of?
I mean, I feel like I should also just mention people who are doing amazing work on this, because
Please.
New Public, Eli Pearser, their team, it's called New Public, and they are actually like researching exactly this question: is what are the metrics that would like indicate that a social media platform is actually benefiting us. There's also a group called Zebras Unite that really think, for them, everything is downstream of the governance model. So for them, it's like, which I don't disagree, but it's like, how are these companies like owned and managed, and how are decisions made? And it all kind of flows from there. So what would it look like to have a cooperative? I mean, they are much better versed. So,
okay.
I feel like I should name them. Yeah.
Great. Okay, then if you want to leave that sort of economic question and get to the content of Faces of X, then let's talk about this. So you come up with this idea out of this miasma of disagreement and false binaries, which is what?
Which is explain what Phases of X is. Yeah. So it's really just, if you wanted to, let's say, help people in this miasma of ideas, help people transcend this kind of binary thinking, what would you do? Phases of X is one answer to that question. It is a series of short videos that integrate different perspectives on culture war issues like gender, abortion, and race, keeping it light. And the format is very simple. I use the Hegelian triad that we just talked about. So thesis, antithesis, synthesis. It's the same person playing all three. So Steele Manning, the thesis and the antithesis, like really faithfully representing the different sides of the debate. And then synthesis walks in the door, again, the same person wearing a different outfit, and attempts to articulate an integrated perspective. I will say, though, that even though, it's faces of gender, faces of abortion, it's these issues, ultimately the series is not really about the individual issues. It's ultimately about cultivating our capacity to integrate different perspectives and perceive the wholeness that Einstein so beautifully talked about.
Let's have a listen to one of them, just from the gender episode, right? So this is Buck Angel. In this video, you have Buck playing an extremely pro-trans activist, and then a skeptical, more conservative position. And then he comes into the room and says, hang on a second, and gives an explanation of a synthesis.
Gentlemen, females, friends. We're talking about three interrelated things: biology or sex, culture or what's often called gender, and psychology or identity. One of you thinks what a woman is entirely determined by a person's sex, while the other thinks a woman is defined by whatever gender they identify with. In other words, one of you is leaning exclusively on biology, while the other is leaning exclusively on psychology and culture. The truth is, biology is the most fixed, but culture and psychology are equally important. And ultimately, we need all three legs of the stool to understand what a woman and what a man is. We need this damn stool, because this debate is honestly exhausting.
Yeah, I'm tired of this too.
Me too. We're also talking about different contexts, like sports and classrooms. Sports is a competition between bodies, not a competition between identities. So perhaps in that context, we should categorize athletes according to their biology. Classrooms require civility. So perhaps there, we should identify people the way they want to be identified. Maybe the question isn't what's more important, biology, culture, or psychology, but instead, under what circumstances should we lean on which leg of the stool?
That makes sense.
So I really like that articulation, and I think this is the perfect example of a subject that is ripe for what you're trying to do, in the sense that almost everybody knows that the extremes of both sides are wrong.
Yeah.
And a bit crazy, right? Like, this is one of those things, this of all of the kind of woke culture war, like social justice reckoning issues of the past 5 years, I would say this was the one that took people most by surprise in the ferocity of its censoriousness in the early days of this decade, and the kind of sudden dogmatism and penalties for speaking out against a new progressive orthodoxy on gender, and now is like swinging back in nasty other directions, and has been for a couple of years, with some states passing really regressive and retrograde and anti-trans bills, and like the backlash. You can see the backlash, and I think probably 80% of the population is just like, what the fuck? Like, can't we just all accept that biological sex is a thing, and then there's also this community of people for whom it's really complicated, and we should treat them nicely? Like, how many people actually disagree with that?
The sensible position. Yeah, totally. Yeah. And I mean, in that respect, social media is like, it's kind of just this funhouse mirror. Like, maybe the majority of us, and I actually do think, are actually just much more sensible and reasonable. But often we're fed these two options. We're given this false trade-off. It's like your only choices are woke or anti-woke. Like, that's, just reject the false trade-off.
Something interesting has happened during this election cycle, Stephanie, where there's a meme, I want to say, on the right about Kamala Harris, and this is just popping into my head right now, but which touches on this, which is the claim that Kamala Harris in 2019 or 2020 supported giving sex change operations to illegal immigrants in prison. Have you heard this claim?
I have.
So Trump made it during the debate. It then became a thing. She's been asked about it since. I mentioned it to my partner, and we have many trans friends, and he's kind of, I guess, more sympathetic to the more extreme trans position than I might be, and he was like, that is such an obvious, ridiculous dog whistle. Like, has there ever been a single case of that actually happening? And the answer is no. There has never been a single case in America of an illegal immigrant getting a sex change operation while in prison. Like, never happened. But what is happening here, I think, is happening under the hood, and it's an interesting thing to me, which is the reason it's coming up is not. I mean, it's partly cynical people on the right just trying to trap Kamala Harris, but I think it's also not about the illegal immigrant getting the sex change operation. It's about whether the candidate for the centre-left party will depart from the crazies on her side over even the most extreme example. I don't think it's a cynical trap. I actually think it's an invitation to say, we all saw what happened over the past 5 years or so, where the left lost its mind a little bit. Here's an easy box for you to check. To say, this is definitely a place at which I would not go. So if you're center left or center right, if you're part of that reasonable 80%, don't worry, I'm not like a Manchurian candidate who's going to come in and be super, super woke. And the inability for her to clearly do that is not very Stephanie Lepp of her.
No, I mean, you're preaching to the choir. For me, it's like a huge opportunity. Missed huge opportunity. You got it right there. You're past the primary. The field is open. It's
don't need to pander at all anymore.
It's crazy to me. I feel like there is a huge weight. And actually, I mean, we shouldn't like go too in the weeds on candidates, but I would like RFK's, just for what it's worth, whatever you think about RFK, his tagline on abortion was more choices, more life. Beautiful. So beautiful. Like, he took that opportunity, and had he been in the debate, he would have just like mopped the floor. I think synthesis, just mopped it. So
he might have had to write his words down because he's so annoying to listen to due to his disability.
I know, it's unfortunate.
I'm sorry.
But I totally agree with you. For me, it's like a wide open opportunity.
Yeah. So there's an example of like batshit crazy on each side. And then, there's this kind of Matt Walsh universe of like hyper anti-trans, like motivated right-wing blowhards who think it's really clever to ask a really woke person what the definition of a woman is. It's interesting. I don't know what I'd be interested in what circles you swim in, Stephanie, now in California. But before the last Australian prime ministerial election, which was 2022, I might be caught out on that. A conservative reporter from the Rupert Murdoch-owned cable news channel here tried to trap the opposition leader and the prime minister by asking, "What's a woman?" And the now prime minister, I can't remember whether it was before or after he lost the election. I think won the election. I think it was before. Just immediately said, "An adult female. What are you even talking about?" Like he knew the trick, but in a heartbeat was just he laughed it off and was just like, I mean, that's a stupid question. Like, go back to school, sort of thing. Like we all know what a woman is, and so both candidates, were, and that wasn't and this is a centre left, person who has social justice bona fides. He's not someone who is trying to dog whistle to the far right.
Right.
He's just saying, I'm pro-trans. I want equality for trans people.
Yeah.
And a woman is an adult female. Make of that what you will. Is that possible in California in 2024?
I think it is. Like I said, I think the field is open. I think it's so rare, and that's why.
I mean, is it rare? But I guess I'm asking, like, tell me what the climate is.
It is rare.
Would it happen? Would Gavin Newsom say that?
No, but he's on a different mission. He's not on a synthesis mission. That's not his mission. Yeah, but I do think. I mean, I guess. Yeah, this Faces of X is so easy to criticize, right? It's like one side, the other side, and then the integration. But the response has been so much more positive than I expected because there is a demand for this that is not being met. So I do think there is opportunity here. I think often people just assume that they have only two choices, red or blue, right?
Yeah.
It's like, what about something else? What about something new?
Well, I think everyone instinctively knows that they'd have more than those choices, but those choices aren't presented to them, and there's a penalty in the public square for deviating from
and they don't have a name. It's like, what's the third thing that's not pro-choice or pro-life? What's the other thing? Well, the other thing is like reducing the need for unwanted pregnancies while democratically deciding the circumstances under which women can have. Like, that's so what do we call that? But that's like the reasonable thing that most people agree with.
That's why the RFK slogan is useful.
Yeah,
right?
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. And for all of these, there is a reframing of the debate in all of these issues. There's like a taking the extremes on both sides and putting them together and then taking everyone else and like articulating what they actually are when they see together.
I mean, didn't Bill Clinton come up with the sort of basic concept of safe, legal, and rare for abortion? I mean, I think that's also a very clever way of
that was a very synthesis move on his part. Totally.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So the yes, sorry, finish that thought.
The only thing I would add is the zooming out and saying that, like, looking at why are there so many unwanted pregnancies in the first place, and also doing something about, contraception and sex education and parental leave and affordable child, so that we can lessen the need to begin with, right? But But maybe that's part of rare.
The reason I'm skeptical about that is because I think if you're a principled anti-abortionist, that feels like a dodge. Like that feels like if I have a religious conviction that the moment an egg is fertilized and carries all of the genetic code of a Homo sapien, that has the sanctity of personhood, then a whole bunch of hogwash about how, like, we should also encourage people to sin by using condoms. Let's suppose I'm a Catholic.
Right.
In order to avoid this thing. It's like, no, you don't get to murder people, even if they're very, very small people inside another woman's tummy. And it's no good to go around talking about, if we improve childcare, if we improve sex education, which I also oppose as a Catholic, let's suppose, if we impose contraception, which I also oppose as a Catholic, then maybe we can reduce the number of murders. No, we could also just outlaw murder.
Well, so now, and this is good. We're kind of getting into the weeds of the issue. So you can kind of see where how the synthesis, or at least in my mind, operates. Because if you're saying no abortion under any circumstances, like abortion is murder, that perspective does not play well with any other perspective. That perspective is inherently unintegratable. We literally cannot integrate it with anything. As with the perspective, abortion always, abortion under all circumstances. So we know we can leave those off the table because they cannot be integrated with anything else, right? And then if you're saying,
you mean we leave them off the table for the purposes of your exercise?
For the purposes of
but
synthesis.
we could bring them onto the table legislatively. And many countries do. I mean, I'm sure, in authoritarian regimes, or in Ted Cruz's imagination.
Sure. But if what I'm trying to pursue is some kind of bigger picture integration, then those perspectives are just not going to play well with anybody else. I cannot include them. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that, but then, and
also,
also
those perspectives are fundamental to the disagreement.
I mean, there are some people who hold those, of course. And that's not, I don't think that's that's not where I'm going. I'm going to the biggest picture possible place where I can include more and more. And I can say, you know what? Yeah, it shouldn't be abortion under all circumstances, nor should it be abortion under none. So the question is which and why? And we can still say life is sacred. And maybe we can also say that under some circumstances, abortion is the least bad option with respect to the sanctity of life.
Yeah. Then would it be true to say that absolutist positions are not suitable candidates for really inclusion in any kind of rational calculus?
Although
at the moment... Sorry,
No,
hold on to that thought.
Yeah, you go.
But that the moment an absolutist opens the door 1 millimeter, I don't know what that is in non-metric. I'm sorry, it's a very small amount. A hundredth of an inch. It's bigger than that. Don't write in. The moment they open the door a little bit, then we're talking about a matter of degrees, and they suddenly are on the playing field of the Stephanie Lepp mission, because they've already conceded that there are circumstances under which they're amenable to compromise.
I would say that, and that is actually a great question for someone who holds a fundamentalist. Is are there any circumstances in which what you're saying does not apply? Are there any? And if they say no, then it's this is going to be really challenging. That said, I do say I'm so open-minded. I'm even open to being closed-minded sometimes. And there are some things that, I'm just completely slavery. We're done. That's not right. That's not, it's a meaningful synthesis on race.
Just because I'm Josh, let me push back.
Okay, I have a pushback too, actually. Let's hear what you just say.
What's your pushback?
No, let's hear yours.
Well, mine is just a sort of a philosophy of ethics thought experiment. If you could, if there was a nuclear device and Elon Musk had gone mad and he was about to blow up the entire world with his new, it's not nuclear, it's an AI thing, and he was going to press the button, but and there was only one person in the world who had the know-how to be able to stop him from doing it, but they were refusing to do so. Would you enslave that person and force them to do the work to save the world?
Yeah. I love that you're doing this exercise and you're taking yourself there, because it is a great question to ask oneself. Under what circumstances is what I'm saying not true, or does it not apply? It's great. And I mean, I don't know if that qualifies. I'm thinking of slavery.
Maybe that's not slavery.
Well, I'm thinking of slavery as a civilizational operating system, that no longer. But are there some contexts in which, something that looks but is not a civilizational operating? There possibly. It's a great thinking device.
What was your example? Did you have a thought experiment?
This is going to be so whatever. This is all about uncomfortable conversations.
Exactly.
So, I do actually think that within the context of the bedroom, BDSM, I think that's a context in which we've figured it out, how to do oppression and submission in a consensual way that people are into. And sometimes it goes off the rails and it can be very dangerous. And is this kind of oppression something, I don't know, blah, blah, blah. There's like a million like caveats and blah, blah, blah. But I would say like, there's a way in which we've kind of like figured out how to do that thing in a way that isn't our civilizational operating system.
Right. Yeah. But
and it's fun for people.
It's fun, but much like social media without algorithms is not social media in my book. Slavery with consent,
bondage,
is not slavery. In my book, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
I think that the core objection to slavery is that the enslaved are not consenting.
Yeah, totally.
Like if you had a civilizational slavery situation, so here's another thought experiment. We managed to genetically engineer a species of Homo sapien who just love being enslaved. They just love serving other people. They're basically like how much a dog just loves going to the park with its owner. They just love doing their work. For the rest of us.
Yeah.
Is it ethically problematic to enslave them if you emancipate them and they're like, no, let us keep working. We want to keep being slaves.
Yeah.
To me, that's not really slavery anymore.
Right. It's not really slavery anymore. And I think it does speak to this like evolutionary kind of expanding thing that we've been talking about, because it's like you're able to like do this like kind of a thing, but within a bigger context that makes it okay, instead of like it being the entire.
I love that
context.
We've just created a synthesis to create a new regime of slavery. We've gone from the thesis of slavery, the antithesis of slavery is wrong, and right here, right now, ladies and gentlemen,
BDSM.
We have the new synthesis of not just BDSM, but a master race of slave-loving imps who will serve us forever. Good for us.
No.
No. You quote, I've seen you on Twitter quoting my friend and someone who I'm a big fan of, Megan Daum, who says, like, I don't remember whether it was her or whether it was someone else who was talking about there being a kind of reflexive knee-jerk, like heterodox orthodoxy almost at the moment, where like everyone thinks it's highly sophisticated and nuanced. Oh no, she was talking about being nuanced as fuck, wasn't she? Like, like where like nuanced bros go around like trying to pick holes in both sides and think they're terribly clever for taking a reflexively contrarian position about everything. How does that map onto your Hegelian worldview?
Well, yeah, that I see as, I call it knee-jerk contrarianism, and specifically it's often knee-jerk anti-wokeness. And what I think is going on is we've kind of learned how to do equal opportunity criticism. It's like, congratulations, you've learned how to criticize the right and the left. But where is the equal opportunity praise? Right? Where's the taking the insights, no matter where they come from, and weaving them together into some bigger picture that doesn't devolve into superficial both sidesism? Like that's the move.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. I'm just pausing because people often ask me like how to have uncomfortable conversations, or to write a book about having uncomfortable conversations. And it's actually quite hard because I don't yet have my like list of 6 easy things that you should do in a conversation to make it less hostile and more constructive. But touching on the distinction between praise and critique is a good point, I think. I think that's definitely part of the jigsaw piece, because so many self-styled intellectual cultural commentators, especially on Instagram Reels and places like that, when they're talking about controversial issues, I'm thinking now specifically of Gaza just because it happens to be in my head, get a lot of kudos and seeming nuance by being by calling out the shitty reporting on either side, the hypocrisy, the callousness,
it's
either
endless.
of people who are defending Israel or of people who are defending what seems like jihadists. Yeah, it's endless. And it's like, I've found the whole thing quite unseemly in the past year because it's, again, like coming back to the transgender thing, it's so obvious, I think, to 80% of people that there are blowhards on both sides of this issue. And of course, it's terrible what's happening to innocent Gazan children. And of course, it's also really complicated to be a Jew in the Middle East in a state that has the history that it does. Like, everyone is aware of this except for people who are trying to score points and who are incentivized to do so by the media and social media and just like cultural systems that we have in place, even just the tacit kind of conversational systems where you get more kudos for pontificating and denouncing than you do by going, well, you know, it's complicated.
They have a point. Yeah, or they have a point. Yeah, it's like we're all just obsessing over the bathwater. It's like, and what are you going to build? Yeah, what are you going to create? And it's funny, it's like the flip side of that is kind of this, like what I mentioned earlier, like the bridging field, they will do just like listening. It's like, I listen to you, you listen to me, and now it's like we heard each other. It's like, and then what are you going to build? Like now, again, it's the same. It's like, but now what are you going to build? Now what are you going to create together out of the things you just heard?
And what about the difficulty? You were mentioning the difficulty in packaging that thing that you're building. It's not easy to sloganize, right? There's the RFK thing. There's the Bill Clinton slogan. So like you've got these theses, these antitheses, and these syntheses. So in the case of gender, you've got the thesis, which is gender transitions for no one. The antithesis, which is gender transitions for everyone. The both sidesism, which would be gender transitions for some but not others. And then your synthesis
it's very long.
is, let me read it here, build a culture that supports healthy body image, less influenced by profit-driven media and healthcare, so that gender transition is chosen less frequently and with greater confidence. Similarly, the one for capitalism is, the thesis is capitalism has mostly upsides. The antithesis is capitalism has mostly downsides. The both sideser would say capitalism has upsides and downsides. And your synthesis is capitalism's downsides create existential risk, but its upsides are what's enabling us to build an omni-win economic system. Not a catchy bumper sticker.
Not quite.
Stephanie.
Not quite. Yeah, I do. I will say, like, it's hard to get it pithy, but I will. Okay, and I'm challenging myself to do that. But when you have, but the people who think it's like not interesting or something, I'm just like, I can't. It's like when you have complexity on your side, how can you not be more interesting? Definitely getting it shorter is a challenge. But
it's not interesting if you lose people. Like, even I'm lost in that capitalism to be honest. Like, I don't quite understand.
Let me explain it, and then you can.
I understand the others.
Okay, maybe you can help come up with a pithier. So the idea, good. So again, thank you. This is great. So the both sides is it's like capitalism has upsides and downsides. It's like, thank you. I didn't learn anything. So the synthesis is this, like, okay, so capitalism has brought us to the brink of collective self-destruction. I mean, if we are literally driving ourselves off a cliff here, and people would take issue with that. Let's just for the sake of just the synthesis articulate.
I was going to jump in and ask you what you mean, whether you're talking about climate chaos or whether you're talking about nuclear destruction or whether you're talking about artificial intelligence.
If we go back to the Donella Meadows, the goal of the system, if the goal of our system, of our operating system is maximizing short-term profit, that is like really dangerous when we do that at the expense of everything else. And we've already hit planetary boundaries and all kinds of, biodiversity law.
The capitalist would say that the rational human is not focused on the rational human meaning the economic actor, is not focused only on short-term profit. They also want to be alive when in their old age, and they want their kids to thrive as well.
Then why is Facebook
mechanisms,
not changing the metrics that it's holding itself? Then why are these companies? Our social media would look very different.
Facebook isn't the whole economy. I guess the retort would be that capitalism as an economic system will provide competitors to Facebook. I'm spitballing here, but that. Anyway, you finish your thought, and then I'll come back and quibble with each.
Yeah, quibble. Okay, so the synthesis would say that its downsides have brought us to the brink. Let's say have created existential risk, but its upsides, what it has enabled us to build, like it's because of capitalism that we have even built closed loop production systems. That is a product of capitalism. So its downsides are,
What's a closed loop production system?
It's a production system that creates no waste. That you uses
what?
I mean, think of manufacturing anything, like a brewery. I mean, just anything that you could manufacture where you're using, it's a closed loop system. It's not creating any waste or pollution. And this is
there any industry that doesn't produce waste and pollution?
Well, when I say waste is just something that cannot be. I mean, there's also, it's like, at what point, how much time does it have to take to biodegrade in order for us to call it waste and not, so there is obviously some gray here, and I don't know.
17 and a half years.
Okay. It's less than 17 and a half years. Yes, there are, businesses and companies and manufacturing, I mean, that produce like carpets and that like their whole thing is agroecologically designed to produce no waste, like nothing that cannot be used by something else and just like sits there polluting. So yeah, it is. And that capacity evolved within the context of capitalism. Right. And so the synthesis is like, yeah, capitalism has brought us to the brink of, whatever, existential risk. And it's because of capitalism that we even can like evolve beyond capitalism.
How is that different from saying capitalism has upsides and downsides?
Because that's making it, capitalism has upsides and downsides. Is just like, it's like, okay, so then it's neutral. Do we still not want to change it? Do we want to keep it or do we not want to keep it? Is it good or is it like, what do we do with it? And the synthesis is like, we want to use it so that we don't need it anymore. We want to use it to develop. Isn't your
synthesis then that capitalism has upsides and downsides, but most of the downsides, but the solution to most of the downsides is more capitalism?
No, I think capitalism has developed our capacity, has enabled us to evolve beyond capitalism. And the next thing, I mean, and people might quibble with this, like John Mackey might call the thing that I'm saying is the next thing. He would maybe call it conscious capitalism. So he would just call it like a new form of capitalism. So that is, but omni-win, like the critique there that's being made in Faces of Capitalism, like often we pit socialism against capitalism, right? It's like socialism. And the critique that is being made is actually socialism and capitalism share the same flaw. They both prioritize narrow metrics at the expense of everything else. Capitalism is really focused on profit at the expense of sustainability and equality, and socialism, ideally, in theory, right, is prioritizing equality at the expense of innovation and freedom. And the idea is to move on to like a system that actually accounts for more of what we value, rather than just focusing on this and then like at the expense of everything else, something that can, which yes, John Mackey might call that conscious capitalism, but whatever it is, it's able to account for more of what we value.
I think the capitalism example is the weakest.
Okay.
And I'm trying to figure out why, and it might be my own bias in thinking that the insights of the market, the kind of Adam Smith principles that the best way to generate productive activity that humans find useful is through the market, that is a principle of human psychology and cultural organization as fundamental and kind of prima facie as like natural selection is in biology or something like that. And that so there is not really two sides. Like, I mean, I'm a big lefty. If it was up to me, we'd all be like much more socialist in the sense of we'd be much more Scandinavian, for example, and we'd have big taxes on companies and stuff, and much higher taxes on the wealthy.
But Scandinavia that's capitalism.
That's right. That's what I'm saying. So for me, it's just like we've discovered this mechanism of producing cool shit, which is capitalism, and then it has all kinds of downsides. And so you just try to use the state to moderate those downsides and to make them as unbad as possible. whilst minimizing the extent to which you're impeding innovation, prosperity. So to me, that is just capitalism has upsides and downsides. So you try to resolve the downsides.
I mean, I would say there is a reframing here of capitalism versus socialism, or free versus regulated markets. Like, that's no longer the spectrum that I'm painting anymore. I'm saying let's from economic systems that prioritize narrow metrics versus economic systems that account for more of what we truly value. And if the thing that accounts for more of what we truly value, if you consider that a form of capitalism, fine. But that's what I'm saying.
So you're saying that much as you might change the economic model of social media to include things like new connections between very different people,
and French
you might
cheese,
change, and French maids doing the can smothered in reblochon while eating poisson. You might also change the economic system to have a market system that takes into account, or that has to take into account, much more of the negative externalities, and maybe like the 1,000-year time frame, and like the fate of the planet, and the existential risk to humankind. Like, am I on the right track?
Yeah,
right,
yeah,
okay.
That sounds
and
good.
That would be more than just Danish style healthcare.
I don't know enough about Denmark, honestly, to...
Go away and school yourself, Stephanie.
Okay.
This is the kind of white privilege that I'm sick and tired of. Although the Danes aren't very white. But yes, carry on.
It could be that this is precisely already the direction, like many... I'm kind of speaking to the kind of like culture war thing between capitalism and socialism. But it could absolutely be. It could absolutely be.
Yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I want to hear what you want to say.
Oh, it could absolutely be that Denmark and Switzerland are already, like, they might already represent an omni-win. What could be
I don't think so.
Omni-win.
I mean,
no?
But I mean, yeah, maybe. But I mean, they're not factoring in whether or not forests are going to exist in 500 years into their free market.
And we are a global. The other truth is that we're a global system now. It's like what you're doing in your country. It's like, how much shit are you outsourcing in ways that don't end up on your balance sheet?
Oh, absolutely. So, yeah, totally. I mean, yes, it's always funny to me when in Australia we have conversations about what we're doing for the climate or not doing for the climate, and whether we're going to have nuclear power or not have nuclear power, at the same time as we're the world's number 2 exporter of uranium, and like maybe number 1, 2 or 3 on coal. I think China's number 1, but like, and that's all off the balance sheet. It's oh, well, yeah, but that coal's being burned by other people.
Totally.
That uranium
is
being used by other people. I don't give a
shit what country you're from.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. And we're like, Australia's doing really well. We're a nuclear-free country, the number 2 exporter of uranium.
Right. Right.
But we love cashing those checks. They're good. So I might be in a different cultural milieu than you are and one of the reasons why the capitalism thing doesn't land as profoundly for me is because it doesn't strike me as a culture war issue. In my circles, there is people aren't debating capitalism the way that there is like this hostile culture war debate about race, sex, transgenderism, climate. And, just general kind of wokeness. So I think that's where your mission really lands. Let's just, so we've done abortion. Oh, race is the big one, right?
Sure.
We haven't touched on race. We're almost an hour into the conversation. We haven't even mentioned race. Okay, get ready. Dust yourself off. We're just beginning.
Take
it was all the prelude.
Yeah.
We got any more coffee in here? So, race. Are you in favor or against it?
Oh my God. Are you asking me seriously?
I mean, it's a joke question, but sure, why not take it? Because I know that you are against it. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I mean, in your video, you sort of address it.
Yeah, I'm pro weaning ourselves off of it. Yeah.
What does that look like?
It's going to be a process, but part of it is how we educate our kids, who, by the way, have no concept of that. They are just seeing people and meeting people. They're not, But
and they might say, let me just qualify that, because sometimes people object to the claim that kids aren't racist, because kids will sometimes say things that code as racist to us. You know, he has funny looking eyes.
But he's talking about
or like,
skin
why
color.
does why is the person burnt or something like that, right? And you go, my God, that's incredibly racist. But that's only racist because we're superimposing it into our culturally contingent understandings of what is racist or not. They're not being mean because of it. Well, they might be mean because if kids are tribal, they're sometimes mean about anything, but they're no likelier to be mean about a person's skin color than they are about a person's hair color or the way a person runs or the way a person talks or like whatever. It's no more salient to them than any other way that they could be mean to each other.
Totally. Yeah. And they're talking about skin color. They're not talking about race. It's like, we can talk about skin color. It's like, you're darker than me and I'm lighter than you, and that's fine. Race is another. I mean, the couple key points. I mean, I can just kind of like summarize the synthesis.
Yeah.
If that's helpful. Yeah. So there's kind of three main points. The first one is this like Black people are victims of it, and then this like Black people are resilient because there's an integration there. It's like, yes, racism has unleashed untold brutality on Black Americans, and Black Americans have exhibited untold resilience in the face of it. So that's what it's like. It's like we can be both victims and resilient, and that can be one little point of integration. The second point is this system versus the individual thing. It's like, okay, it's obviously not one or the other. The roots of racial injustice lie both with the system and the individual. But then
just unpack what you're talking about with system for people who aren't as
system,
involved in the woke dialogue. Like, you're talking about there being let me see if I'm paraphrasing this right.
Yeah.
In the past 5 to 10 years, we've gone from, in sort of polite social justice progressive circles, from thinking about racism as being animus towards other races or like prejudice of some kind, to an understanding that was previously a more academic one, where you're not actually talking about necessarily relations between individuals. You're talking about systemic structures that exist in society that perpetuate disadvantage for communities of color. That might be things that, are not overtly, obviously racist, but just in terms of, it could be rental policies, it could be, whatever it might be. It might be things that were not intended. We're not talking about Jim Crow laws, and we're not talking about calling someone the N-word on the street. We're talking about a white supremacist superstructure that kind of invades and inhabits all of our kind of invisible systems that we're living in and amongst. Is that
exactly? Yes, totally. Well paraphrased. Yeah, it's like it's built into the system, which therefore means that we need to change the system. Right? That would be the solution. It would have to be It would have to be something like affirmative action. It would have to be some kind of systemic solution to address a systemic problem.
We just had a big referendum. I don't know if you know, but last year in Australia, there was the whole country went to vote to change the constitution. It failed. To introduce a body where Indigenous Australians, First Nations Australians, would convene to provide a non-binding advice to Parliament on issues. So that was a good example, I think, of where you try to embed create some new system. To address some existing,
Okay, but it didn't pass.
It didn't fly.
It didn't pass. So that's the.
But it's it's very hard to change constitutions.
Yes, it is. By design.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the point. So that would be like the left, the political left in the U.S. is the systemic. It's the system, and then the political right is something like it's the individual. Like it's up to you to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right?
Yeah.
Slavery no longer exists, so it's up to you. So and the synthesis, of course, is like it's not one or the other. It's both. But how do you move beyond the both sides? It's like, okay, great, it's the system and the individual. But the synthesis is something like, build systems that empower individuals to depend less on those systems, right? It's like you use affirmative action so that you don't have to use it anymore. And when a lot of these like systemic policies are designed, it's like there's no endpoint. It's not defined. It's like, how will we know we don't need it anymore? That has to be like designed into it. That's how we know it worked.
What do you say to the Glenn Lowrys and Coleman Hugheses of the world who say, no, you're never going to know when that point is, so just don't use affirmative action and don't use, structural solutions, because all you're doing is opening the door to a war of all against all, and you're just, picking at old wounds.
I just generally disagree with. I think trying to do the simple thing because we don't believe in our capacity to do the complex thing. I don't think we can actually afford to do that anymore. The spoon feeding ourselves the simple stuff, not helpful.
I mean, in their defense, I suppose they would say that there's nothing simple about equality and egalitarianism.
So let's get into it. What does equality look like? What kind of society do we want to be? Let's flesh that out. What a great question to try to take up democratically. Yeah. What do we want our workplaces, it's and our, governing bodies to, what would a diverse, what would that look like? How do we know that we've gotten there? What does e pluribus unum look like? Great question.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say that, the remedy is to use the structures to advance the individual. That kind of rhymes with the capitalism synthesis, in the sense that you use the utility of capitalism in order to address the concerns of its critics. So yes, I like the synthesis there, but your racial synthesis does go further. In the sense that you actually then, I think, smuggle in something that's not actually a synthesis, but it's not another idea.
It is, yeah. And to be totally honest, I'm not even sure where I fully am on this idea, to just be totally honest. And the idea
being that we should just not have race as a thing.
Yeah, it's the idea is that race is a lie that was invented to perpetrate racism. And we do not need to pretend that the lie exists in order to dismantle racism. On the contrary, in order to free ourselves from racism, we must dismantle the lie of race. And it's funny you say smuggle, because it's you're almost assuming that every single point of synthesis should land somewhere in the center or something. And
no. That's a fair criticism, but not in my case. Yeah. I'm not assuming that it has to land in the center. I'm assuming that it has to be derived from one of the sides.
Yeah, in a way, I actually do think it is derived a little bit, and because one side is very focused on dismantling racism. Well, so what is one? It's like a strategic. One side is saying we want to dismantle racism, and the way to dismantle it is to over focus on it. And the other side is saying we want to dismantle racism, and we're going to pretend that it doesn't exist.
Or not pretend. That might be a slightly ungenerous way of putting the conservative side.
Sorry.
Not pretend that it's going to exist, it doesn't exist, but say that the best remedy to racism is to not enact anti-white racism either, and to treat everybody, to behave in a colorblind fashion.
Yes. And I guess
both of those positions, I think, agree with the existence of racial groups.
They do, yes.
And then you're going further and saying, well, actually, Stephanie Lepp would like a different something that is not actually implied by either of those, nor by their synthesis, which is something that I'm quite sympathetic to, but is probably part of a different conversation, which is, racial categories are culturally contingent. If the colonial overlords of the world had all had red hair because they were all Scottish, you could imagine them dividing the world up into red-haired people and not red-headed people, and enslaving the not red-headed people. And then we'd all think a lot about not red-headed people and red-headed people instead of people with, darker skin or lighter skin. You could imagine a bunch of different metrics, eye color or whatever it might be, or height. And so maybe it's time to just talk about skin color and culture. I mean, you don't want to do away with culture, right? There are cultural differences. People come from cultural communities, but maybe the overlap of skin color and culture that we call race is not useful.
I think the synthesis is actually, and it's not, this isn't really the script is actually almost more extreme on that than I actually feel. personally, to be honest. And granted, my views are kind of like evolving and shit. Like those videos are like the snapshot of where I was on the day that I
Right.
it's like it's it. But and by the way, I don't mean to portray the conservatives as like pretending race doesn't exist. Yeah, but I do think the synthesis is maybe more something like one side really wants to hold on to race and use race in order to dismantle racism, and the other side really wants to just like be, colorblind, just like let's not, let's judge people by the content of their character. And I think something that is more synthesis than what's actually in the video would be something more like, let's wean ourselves, let's like in some cases, we might actually need race in order to repair the harms that race caused, like with race-based equity policies. Like we actually use race in order to, like we need it. So it's something more like, it's the same. It's like, let's use it in a way that will allow us to wean ourselves off of it
Right.
over time. Kind of a thing.
The Coleman Hughes objection to that would be, it never ends. It never ends. The demand will never end. Like you'll use the system to achieve greater equity, but because humans aren't created equal, individuals have different capacities, cultures have different interests, cultures have different abilities. Like there's always going to be, if your mission is to be on the hunt for disparities, for racial disparities that should be remedied by, the system, you will always be able to find.
But I think that's we're still trying to simplify it too much. It's like we're not looking for equal outcomes. We're also not looking for doing nothing about it because we can't challenge ourselves with the question of what does something that, like the answer is probably something that looks more like jazz, right? It's like we're all skilled. We're all playing our instrument. Like some people play longer than us. Some people get solos. Some people don't. But it sounds amazing. It sounds amazing.
But right? Isn't that the colorblind society? I mean, isn't that?
I'm not fully convinced that there is no room for race-based equity policies. I'm not.
Yeah.
But I also think that it's incumbent upon, it's like the question must be asked, like, how do we know that we achieved the goal? What is the goal?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not convinced either. I voted yes in the Indigenous referendum, and I think it makes sense to look at populations like First Nations Australians who have way inferior health outcomes and life expectancies than the rest of the population as a coherent group that needs to be assisted.
And I think if we need to be, if I'm also not so concerned with like being slightly less meritocratic for a temporary period of time, that doesn't concern me as much as it concerns other people. I think because I also understand.
Well, it doesn't concern you because you're not an Asian who's trying to get into university right now.
But fine, okay. But like what I would say is it doesn't concern me because I understand that these values exist in dynamic tension. Meritocracy exists in dynamic tension with other values that I also hold dear. It's too easy for me, right? It's like the capitalist to just focus on one of them. It's like, oh, actually, no, it's actually a little more like, what if you focus on multiple of them and you're actually trying to like triangulate between them? Like, yeah, that's hard, but that's like what democracy is for.
Yeah. No, that's good. I want to talk about some issues where this might not work. So we talked about, like thought experiments like slavery or something like that.
Okay.
But I think it's convenient that you've chosen subjects, with the possible exception of capitalism, which might be a bit of a red herring, but you've chosen the three subjects of race, transgenderism, and abortion as ones where I think the vast majority of people understand that anyone who is extremely strident on either side is missing something. And that there have to be good ideas on both sides that can form a consensus to operate from. I would say the same is true of Gaza, and we can think of another few things. But some of the things that are tearing us apart as a society are much trickier because there's so much more imbalanced and there's so much more bullshit on one side. So, like, part of what I'm afraid of, like the big sort of meta point behind this question is like I sometimes question my own mission and my own ability to pull off what I'm trying to do with this show in a climate where I look at how many people believe that the 2020 election was stolen,
Yeah.
right? Or I look at, like, I just did an episode with an economist, a health economist, about Australia's response to COVID.
Uh-huh.
And he is incredibly learned. He knows all of the data, but I intentionally did not touch the question of vaccine injuries and vaccine, like the conspiracy theory that lots of people are dying mysteriously, right? There's a conspiracy theory on the right that people are just falling over dead at the moment. We don't really know why. That, because mortality rates did spike after COVID, and it was momentarily inexplicable, and then they looked at it, and it was mostly people who had dementia or who had cancer who weren't able to get the healthcare that they would have gotten in 2020 and 2021 because of the pandemic and so on. But you look at the spike and you go, well, hang on a second. We have, like, non-COVID deaths right after everyone gets vaccinated go up. And then that feeds into conspiracy theories about young people keeling over and dying from heart failure, supposedly because of the vaccine. I didn't want to get into any of that for the same reason that when I'm talking about 9/11, I don't want to get into Building 7 and the melting point of steel. Because it's just you're going to go down endless rabbit holes.
Yeah.
And yet there's a significant proportion of the population who are obsessed with why we're not talking more about this and why there is this elite media silence on, or I guess a conspiracy to try to poo-poo all of the irregularities in the 2020 election, for example. And I don't know what to do about that phenomenon. Tell me what I should do, Stephanie.
Let me give you advice. Yeah, I mean, this goes back to the synthesis can be weaponized. Like, we're not going to do a synthesis between, people who understand that the earth is round and flat earthers and come out with we have to be very discerning about which perspectives we integrate and how we're framing the two sides of the debate and make sure it's a legitimate debate that we are, right? Where the integration, where the synthesis will be something that allows us to understand the thing more rather than giving us
how do you exclude a position from being a legitimate participant in the thesis, antithesis, binary?
One way is when the perspective doesn't play well with other perspectives, right? The abortion always and abortion never. Like, you're literally just unintegratable. I can't do anything with you. Sorry.
Right.
The other one is if it's morally, if we've already evolved beyond that in terms of human rights, that's where the slavery, it's I'm not going to include the perspective that slavery should be our societal OS, right? So it's, but is there a surefire way? Maybe it's helpful if we speak within the context of a specific example.
Well, okay. So since you just mentioned human rights, this may be a side note, but many women's rights activists would say that it is a woman's human right, and up until recently was her constitutional right to have abortion. And that is also a position from which it's presumably sort of a non-starter to negotiate from, right? I mean, that's not the way that almost any other democracy treats it. Oh, by the way, thank you so much for being an American who produced something that actually talks about what other countries have done, because in one of your videos you say, well, the way that other countries deal with this, and I was like, thank God, even sensible sounding Americans are often trying to America.
Oh my God, we're just behind. We're just culturally behind.
No, it's not behind at all. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that it is so frustrating and I lived most of my adult life in America, but it is frustrating to the non-American to see how much low-hanging fruit there is that American leftists are not availing themselves of, because Americans insist on reinventing the wheel from scratch because they think that they are so sui generis that no one else has ever done this thing. I just listened to a podcast about the origin of the income tax in America. It was absolutely fascinating. And the entire episode, for an hour or more, doesn't mention the fact that income taxes were an innovation that were being introduced all over the world. It was here was this radical American idea that we would tax, that we would introduce an income tax. And I was like, you're one country out of 100 and something countries, and lots of people. And this was Bismarck was doing this in Germany, long before. Anyway, so that's just my little.
I think we're just culturally a couple of years behind.
I don't think it's behind. I think it's the gravitational force of being gigantic. And
my parents are not American, so maybe it helps to not have grown up in an American household.
Yes. No, I think America could life would be a lot easier for Americans if they just stopped feeling like they had to build every single solution to everything all by themselves. Like a lot of us have been working on similar stuff.
Thank you.
Nonetheless,
thank you.
So abortion, for example, this is not really framed in. It's a woman's human right to have control over her body so much in a country like, say, I'm guessing Germany, which is fairly religious but fairly permissive. It's just like, well, there are compromises. Like, obviously, it's bad killing little babies, but sometimes you got to do bad things because the alternative is worse. It's not framed in human right, like let me go out and march wearing a pussy hat or whatever it is. It's like, this is my human right. Like, that's so corrosive and alienating to the mission of synthesizing anything.
Totally.
Anyway, that's my rant.
Totally.
So talking about specifics, should we do 2020? Election denialism, like as a...
Yeah. I mean, you said, it's funny that you said, it's not funny, it's meaningful that you said that when I was asking, how do you stay tethered to the infinity? And you said, for scientific reason or something like that. Like that it's like, no, that there are facts here and something happened or did not happen. And so it's not it's not a true perspective to include.
Right. But what if a person believes that, so they've seen, because of the algorithms, they've seen lots of videos of election workers boarding up the windows of some counting booth in Arizona or something, and they've heard from Elon that there were irregularities in blah-de-blah, and they've heard from J.D. Vance that social media companies were suppressing information that could be, that was useful to the Biden campaign to suppress. And like the basic sort of prior is something was fishy. And of course it doesn't reach the threshold of being provable in a court of law. So Donald Trump loses his court cases. But that's just because the deep state is crafty about how it gets away with things. But
that's still not that's just an issue of misinformation and back to the social dilemma. Like that, just because people believe that the earth is flat doesn't make it a perspective worth integrating. That said, I mean, it's not really, that's it. Like there are three, there is this, like, how do you even articulate a synthesis perspective? Well, it is an art and a science, and many philosophers from Hegel to Ken Wilber have written extensively about this. But one of the questions I asked myself when trying to articulate some kind of synthesis, is, are there perverse incentives at play here that, if they were addressed, would help alleviate the debate? And we just spent a whole bunch of time talking about the perverse incentives that drive social media. So if we got those out of the way, would there have been this contested, it's like, we also have to look at the context in which this debate is happening. And so much of the context is, and once we zoom out and look at the context, that actually becomes something that more of us can get on the same team about. It's like, wherever you are on the trans issue, like, you probably don't want social media making us all feel shitty about our bodies.
Yeah.
Right? Like, no matter where you are on the trans issue, you probably don't want this corporate healthcare that's driving over medicalization.
I wonder, yes, I'm just trying to wrestle with whether there's a better synthesis on the election denial. And one of maybe my other principles for how to have uncomfortable conversations is to try to grant as much as you can to the opposing side, right? Which often means going meta and going up a level, so that you're not squabbling over details, but you're trying to find what is the either deeper or higher, depending on your metaphor, common ground.
Yeah.
And there may be, I'm just thinking aloud here, there may be a way of saying, I get all of your concerns about what you think are irregularities, and
Yeah.
many, many, many American elections in the past have had irregularities,
Mm-hmm.
right? Elections are not an absolutely perfect process.
Yeah.
And when we're on the hunt for irregularities, especially given the social media environment that we live in, it's always going to be possible for one side or the other to claim that something was fishy. But as a guiding principle, don't you want the American system to endure in a way that says, you know what, for all its minor flaws and little quirks, we're going to trust the electoral, the people who count the votes in each state, and we're just
I
going to
think
take
that's
their word for
beautiful.
it.
I
And
think
that's
that's
like,
beautiful. Yeah.
let's all just get on that team. And
Yeah.
so don't you want to live in an America where in the future, whichever side, all sides just have to go, well, that's the way the votes got reported. That's the
Yeah.
way that they were counted. There may have been dimpled chads or butterfly ballots or whatever the fuck you Americans do in your crazy voting system. Here's a crazy idea for you.
Wait, no, I just want
Nationalize
to
the voting system like other countries do. And in Australia, you just have an electoral commission, which is appointed by non-partisan, non-political data wonks, and they run the election. They run the national election.
Maybe we'll come up with that idea in like 20 years. Maybe we'll come up with it in like 20 years. No, Josh, I love that. You just did exactly the thing of like, instead of just like simplifying and making it black and white and the election was not stolen and shut up, it's like, well, actually, it is a little and like I love it because it gives us more credit for being able to handle the complexity, which I think we can. And if we can't, we need to learn how to. I feel the same way about QAnon. It's like, it's like, okay, there is a global elite with too much power over the world. It's not a satanic cabal of shape-shifting reptilian humanoids,
Says you.
but there is a yes and totally. There's like a that I think does a better service.
Yeah. And I was going to go to climate chaos, but I don't think we need to now, because now that I actually think about it, unless you want to add something to climate, one person who did a good job of the kind of synthesis that you're talking about was actually Arnold Schwarzenegger, when I think he might have still been governor, actually. And he released a video about climate change, and he made the point that even if you dispute the science, and even if you think that scientists have gotten it wrong in the past, and they used to say there was going to be an ice age coming, and look, the hockey stick graph actually didn't end up being the way that it was in terms of temperatures, and now they're talking about global cooling, and the scientists can't even decide on this. His analogy was if I go to a bunch of doctors and a significant number of them say that I'm going to have a major health problem unless I change, then the precautionary principle says I just change anyway. I don't quibble about the data. I don't say, well, hang on, these other doctors also said that I can continue doing this bad thing and maybe I won't die. But if dying is on the table, do everything you can now to make sure that you don't cause your own death. I thought that was a clever way of kind of nullifying the squabbling about climate chaos and just being it's probable enough that it's worth investing considerable money, time, and resources now to head it off, even if we're a bit wrong.
It is also a perfect example of these perverse incentives at play, right? This is the Upton Sinclair. It's you can't pay someone to understand something when his paycheck depends on not understanding it. So it's how much of our response is driven by us not thinking in a synthesis way. In that context, I think in particular, perverse incentives are very much getting in the way of
Yeah. Just in the sense, you mean in the sense that fossil fuel companies have gigantic pockets and they can influence what we hear and what politicians do. Yeah. How optimistic are you, Stephanie?
I am actually optimistic.
Half century.
The next half century. I am optimistic. I feel because
why the fuck would you be optimistic?
Because I have kids, so it's also a it's also a decision that I've made. But I also just think that I mean, I feel like we have been doing this mind expanding thing over time. So even though we swing and we do the thesis antithesis, like I see this season as something that we're growing through. And yeah, and I think tribalism is boring, and I think younger people are just going to be more and more hip to that. Like, how boring is it that you know what someone is going to say based on like what channel you're watching them on, you know? So yeah, I do feel optimistic. I also understand, stakes are high.
We have the optimism thesis, the stakes are high antithesis, and now we just have to come up with a synthesis.
Faces
suitable
of
to pessimism and optimism.
faces of synthesis. I think some of that will come out in faces of artificial intelligence, which I am hoping to do. Yeah, because that's definitely one where, stakes are high. There's a lot of people who are super optimistic. There's a lot of people who are super pessimistic.
Yeah.
What is going on? So,
all right.
Yeah.
Well, I'll talk to you on the other side, or my AI avatar will talk to you about faces of artificial intelligence. Stephanie, thank you. Great to talk to you.
Thank you, Josh. I want to say just thank you. I consider you are like a much needed voice of synthesis. So thank you.
That's lovely. Thanks, Stephanie. Stephanie Lepp's Faces of X. You can get it on X. It's right there in the name.
You can, which is meaningful. It is kind of, you can think of it as the different faces of X. But one I do want to do is Faces of Elon Musk, starring Elon Musk. What do you think? Starring himself.
I love
Elon
that.
Musk, the troll. Elon Musk, the serial social entrepreneur. And then the synthesis is Elon Musk, the Martian. Yeah. What do you think? Yeah?
All right. I'll subscribe. I'll subscribe. Thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you.
Bye.